Drive-Thru Records was a very popular record label that focused on releasing pop punk from 1996 to 2008. The roster for that label featured iconic bands like New Found Glory, Hello Goodbye, Census Fail, The Starting Line, and many more. The label was very important in solidifying and popularizing the sound of pop punk and emo in the mid-2000s. If you look around online, you'll see that Drive-Thru's last release was in 2008, but that is incorrect. The label made a comeback in 2012, signing one band, The Stellar Life, and that story and that band is what I'll be talking about today. First things first, we have to talk about Drive-Thru Records and their impact on the scene. I talked about a few bands they had on their roster, but here is a complete list. As you can see, the roster is pretty stacked, especially and obviously if you like pop punk. New Found Glory, Something Corporate, Dashboard Confessional, Early November, Alistair, Finch, and Midtown, I could go on. Not only was the roster impressive, but the albums released on Drive-Thru were some of the best that those bands ever put out. Sticks and Stones by New Found Glory, Say It Like You Mean It from The Starting Line, Alistair's Last Stop Suburbia, and countless others. So I talked about the bands that Drive-Thru had, but what about the sound of Drive-Thru Records? I'm sure people watching this that kind of grew up in that era in the mid-2000s have really fond memories of the sound and memories just in general of the bands that Drive-Thru put out and the albums that Drive-Thru put out. And sure, like if I had to do an elevator pitch and do a quick overarching, few words on what the sound of Drive-Thru Records is, I'd say pop punk, obviously. But if I had to dive in a little bit more, I would say that the sound of Drive-Thru Records was, bright, direct pop punk. Songs about love, breakups, leaving town, growing up, not sure what to do in life. Pop punk staples for sure, but you gotta remember, especially back then, those topics weren't yet memed to death because the scene was still emerging and growing. And I have to mention before moving on, every time this topic comes up, I've know I've said it in a few other videos, especially when we're talking about pop punk as a whole here. A lot of people like to meme and say, pop punk is just about, breakups and songs about love and stuff like that. And well, that is true to a degree. I feel like I always have to say this, but most songs are about love, spanning across every genre. So there are plenty of things to bash the scene about, but songs just being about love, I always feel like needs a little bit more context than just saying that, pop punk is just about love and breakups when, most songs just, in general are about love anyway. So what happened to Drive-Thru Records, a label that seemed like it was poised for greatness as it was releasing albums that would soon become classics? In a podcast with Alt Press, co-founder of Drive-Thru, Richard Rains, stated that the deal with Geffen Records that Drive-Thru would sign was ultimately the label's downfall as money started to become an issue once that deal was signed. Now, I couldn't find an exact date for when this podcast was published. I saw some stuff around 2007, but again, I couldn't confirm that. The podcast is linked down below if you want to jump right to the part where they're talking about the deal with Geffen Records. That's about an hour and 20 minutes in. And on a personal note, I do have a quick story about Drive-Thru. When I went to go see Alistair play Last Stop Suburbia in full here in Chicago, the lead singer was hyping up the crowd and saying something like, hey, and we're going to be playing this album in full. It came out on a little label called Drive-Thru, and everybody cheered. And the lead singer then went on to say something along the lines of, kudos to you giving the finger to Drive-Thru right now. So again, I don't know what that says about Alistair's thoughts when they were working with Drive-Thru, but I didn't know when I would ever have a chance to tell the story again, and it seemed to make sense when we're talking about Drive-Thru Records. So after being quiet for a number of years, Drive-Thru made some noise in 2012, announcing that they would be entering a grant contest called Mission Small Business, where the winner of that contest would receive $250,000. And at the same time, the label made noise announcing that they were signing a new band, The Stellar Life. Now, a lot of the quotes I'm going to be using coming up, I couldn't find an exact source of where they came from. The only reason they're still on the internet at all is thanks to property of Zach's old site. A lot of it is just lost to the digital void because of the Sweller Life, and apparently Drive-Thru as a whole weren't really popular, and there weren't just a lot of music sites around 2012 that were covering A, DriveThru Records, and B, a band that was relatively small as the Stellar Life. So the only reason these quotes still exist digitally, at least, is thanks to property of Zach's old site. So speaking about signing the Stellar Life, co-founders of Drive-Thru, Richard and Stephanie Rains, said this: "We managed them, and we/they wanted to release the single on DTR because we loved it and it reminds us of the heyday of our label. This isn't even close to their best song either. We are saving those for their CD. They might release the CD on their own, we might do it with them on DTR, but it would be a 50-50 deal and not a signing like we used to do. We wanted them to have total freedom and 100% creative control. So basically, it's all up in the air right now." So let's talk about the Stellar Life. It's very hard to find any concrete information about the band. They released music in a really weird time. It was before streaming, so there's none of the Stellar Life's music even now is on Spotify, Apple Music, or even Bandcamp, and they only released a handful of physical CDs, and it was only their first EP that they even released music to anything physical, being CDs anyway, and just simply put, the band wasn't very popular, so it's not like there's a bunch of zip files or torrents hanging around online. All of the band's songs are on YouTube, but if tomorrow the users of those channels wanted to delete their channels, which would of course remove all the videos, the Stellar Life, at least all their songs, would almost cease to exist digitally. The only way that they would come back online is if, of course, somebody re-uploaded them, or if someone had the physical CDs that the band released. But again, only some of the Stellar Life's music was ever released physically anyway, meaning on CD. So some of the songs would disappear anyway. Again, I don't know if it's interesting to anybody else, but I thought it was fascinating when I was doing research for the video that, with just a few clicks of a button, this band, the Stellar Life, could just cease to exist digitally. And I'm sure other bands in that era, here we're talking about 2012, but I'm sure other bands in around that same time period that weren't super popular, they're not on Spotify, they're not on any streaming services right now, they only just released CDs because they couldn't afford vinyl at the time. And I just thought it was very interesting that those bands from that era, if you fall into those categories like I mentioned, with just a few clicks of a button, you could cease to exist, at least digitally. At the same time as the band signed with Drive-Thru, they also launched a Kickstarter to fund their EP. The link to that Kickstarter is actually still online if you want to check it out, link down in the description. The band was asking for $1,500, and they surpassed it. Later in 2012, the band would release their debut EP, MFers. Now look, we all know what the actual title of the EP is, but YouTube doesn't like it when you swear, so I'm just going to be calling it the MFers EP going forward. Now, I tried to find a copy of this CD, but I couldn't find a single one online to buy, and this was the only physical release, meaning a CD release, so the only physical release that the band ever had. The EP has 5 songs coming in at about 18 minutes, and it's pop punk. For sure pop punk that you can imagine being released by Drive-Thru Records. Songs about getting effed up, like the band song I Got Effed Up, falling in and out of love, breakups, partying, being 19, and even a song about trying to save rock and roll from all these sad emo songs, and instead wanting to sing about sex and drugs. The EP is only 5 songs, but the songs are catchy and they do get stuck in your head. The Stellar Life wasn't a massive band, but if they were just a little bit more popular, I can see these songs maybe catching on more and, being, especially now, being more nostalgic. But I do think there was a little bit of moment in time, especially in the early 2010s, where a band like this, singing pop punk like this, could have exploded on the scene. But just a few years later, later, the 2010 pop-punk revival was taking place, and all of those bands of The Story So Far, Man Overboard, Real Friends, Neck Deep, even Chumped, one of my favorite bands, they all started taking over. And then later, then you had like the almost emo and hardcore revival with bands like Touche Amore and Title Fight and bands like that that were more serious. So the Stellar Life came in at a weird time where like Easycore and like Set Your Goals and 4 Years Strong was kind of like fading just a bit, and more of that like serious kind of darker music was coming up in the, getting more popular in the alternative music scene. So they, like, the Stellar Life was just a band almost out of place. Like the Drive-Thru Records sound and a lot of, you know, the nostalgia comes from the early 2000s. So if this EP was released in, you know, I don't know, 2003 or 2004, or maybe even earlier than that, then maybe the Stellar Life would have blown up and been a massive band. But just in 2012, the scene was just changing and morphing into what it really would become, you know, years later in like, you know, 2016 and 2017. So the timing really seems to be a big issue as far as when we're talking about the Stellar Life. Not soon after the release of the MFers EP, the Stellar Life would break up. The band released a statement saying this: "Dear Stellar Kids, the Stellar Life has decided to part ways. You were amazing. You all made this so much fun for us we can't even explain. Unfortunately, with other bands and living so far away from each other, it did not work out to our expectations. Dave and Tyler have started to write music for a new project, which will be out very soon. Tom has obligations with Cute Is What We Aim For, and Billy has started a project of his own. Expect to hear things from every band, and expect to see those bands tour in the summer of 13. Thank you all again for the support over the past 2 years." And just a note here, I couldn't confirm if the Tom in the Stellar Life and the Tom Falcone listed on the Wikipedia for Cute Is What We Aim For is the same person, that being Tom Falcone, the drummer of Cute Is What We Aim For. That's what's listed on Wikipedia. But again, talking about the Stellar Life, it's a band that's hard to get a lot of information on. I couldn't find anywhere online that had a full list of who actually played in the Stellar Life, even at one, you know, point. So that's why I haven't talked about the names of everyone in the Stellar Life, because I couldn't find a complete list. I imagine, hopefully that's why I wanted to buy the MFers EP. That was the only physical release from the band, because I'd imagine there'd be like a full lineup there. But again, I just wanted to make a note that I couldn't confirm which Tom the band is talking about in that breakup statement. So let's recap. Drive-Thru signs a band, that band launches a Kickstarter, they release an EP, and then they break up. That all happened in 2012 if the information I found online is accurate. And not to mention, remember that grant contest that Drive-Thru entered that I talked about earlier in the video? They did not win. It's also interesting to note that the contest was vote-driven, so people could sign up online and vote for whatever small business to win to receive that grant money. Unfortunately, since it's so long ago, I couldn't find how many votes that Drive-Thru received for that contest, but they did not win and they did not receive that money. So that ends the story of Drive-Thru Records. Even right now, in present time, they're just on indefinite hiatus. But the Stellar Life returned in 2014 with a new EP titled Your Average Cult Classic.
So bury the letters I've gone for forever. Was it worth it? Are you happy? Could you throw away all these pictures and consider me a bad dream? Forget my face and forget my name, 'cause I'm moving on with or without you.
I don't really have much to say about the Cult Classics EP. Bury the Letters was the best song on that EP, in my opinion, and everything else was really just bland and generic. At least with the MFers EP, the songs were catchy and stuck with you. The band would also release a song titled Hate Your Guts and a cover of Call Me Maybe. Those songs are still up online on the band's YouTube channel. And that's the story of the Stellar Life, Drive-Thru Records' last band. Now in the description down below, you're going to find links for all the information and all the sources that I used for this video, as well as links to all the music from the Stellar Life that is still online. I mentioned earlier in the video that there's a lot of conversation online about modern bands that have that Drive-Thru Records sound, and a few picks for me of modern bands that fit that bill would be a band like Light Years and the Bomb Pops, two of some of my favorite bands. They always end up on my year-end Spotify Wrapped. Just great quality pop punk. Bomb Pops released an album either last year or the year before in Death in Venice Beach, which was great. Oh, and even older songs from the Bomb Pops like California in July and Be Sweet are great, as well as like the newer ones like Dear Beer and Notre Dame, which I believe is the band's most popular song now that I think about it. And then Light Years, just quality, great pop punk that really would have fit on Drive-Thru Records, especially in the early 2000s. Songs like The Summer She Broke My Heart, I mean, is like an instant pop punk juggernaut. So links to both of those bands will be down in the description as well. Please like and share the video, subscribe if you haven't, tell all your friends, follow me on Twitter, and as always, thanks for watching.